Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea.
You have come upon the Great Lakes Guys podcast. The podcast features not only the history, geography, and geology of the land, waters, and people of the Great Lakes Basin, but as well we interview talented people from around the region who form the innovative cultural web of music, arts, technology, and science of the Great Lakes Basin. And before getting to the podcast interview, we would like to thank Lee Murdoch, the Great Lakes balladeer, who allowed us to use his recording of the song, The Great Lakes Song. The Great Lakes Song was originally composed by Pat Daly, another prominent balladeer of the Great Lakes.
Hardy are the seamen on the ships that load the iron ore, hauling out of Thunder Bay, bound for Buffalo. And hardy are the fishermen, like their fathers were before. They say, bury me at sea when it's my time to go. Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and Sault Ste.
Today we have an interview with two young women who are leading very special lives here in the Great Lakes region. We are interviewing Cassandra Sadler and Andrea Yaxamer, who prefers to be called Andy. These two women are underwater marine archaeologists who work for the Thunder Bay Marine Sanctuary, a NOAA facility in Alpena, Michigan. NOAA, of course, is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Alpena is on the Thunder Bay of Lake Huron in the northern lower peninsula of Michigan. There is estimated to be a couple hundred shipwrecks within the marine sanctuary, which extends from Mackinac at the tip of the lower peninsula down the Huron coast for about 120 miles. Today we are speaking with the two archaeologists to discover what it is like to do underwater archaeology in the Great Lakes, and also, we hope, to inform the young people of the region that there are some very exciting and interesting careers to be found in the Great Lakes region. Cassandra, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to Alpena, the sanctuary?
Absolutely. I'm originally from Milford, Delaware, nice little town on the eastern shore of Delaware. And I went to the University of West Florida for my master's in historical maritime archaeology when I was 18 years old.
So how did you choose at that young age to go into marine archaeology?
Well, I actually started school in my undergrad for marine biology.
Marine biology.
And so I had taken all of my science courses, my biologies and chemistries and marine biology and oceanography. And I realized how much I really hated chemistry. It just doesn't go natural with me. But I really loved my history courses. And then I took an intro to archaeology class as an elective and kind of got into it that way. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that you could study shipwrecks as a job.
Yeah.
I was exposed to shipwrecks when I was younger. In Delaware, my mother was working for the state of Delaware at the time as a marine scientist, and the Corps of Engineers were doing some dredging for a beach nourishment project, and somebody missed a target on their side scan data, and they ended up hitting a Civil War era shipwreck.
Whoa.
And thousands of artifacts washed up on shore. And I remember combing the beach with my mom when I was little, and finding these little tin figurines for mapping purposes. And so I always had a fascination with history and shipwrecks, but I didn't know you could study it as a job. So when I learned that during my elective in college, I started going down that path. I switched my major to history and did a minor in anthropology. And then I went on to graduate school and attended the University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida for their program. After I graduated, I actually had a professor there who had done a lot of work with Thunder Bay previously. And he thought that I would be a good fit up here. And just that's how I ended up here.
I see.
I moved up. Yeah.
Well, so you must have had, it seems like your mother must have influenced you a little bit, with her interest in marine things. I mean, it must have rubbed off on you a little bit, don't you think? Or no?
Yeah, I think so. I spent a lot of time on the beaches and on the water when I was younger. So definitely influenced me that way.
I see. Okay, Andy, how about you? How did you make it up to Alpena, Michigan at the Thunder Bay facility?
I am from Reno, Nevada, originally.
Yeah.
I got my undergrad degrees in biology and anthropology. I actually started out pre-med and shadowed my first surgery. And the first time I saw the blood, I was like, this is not for me. And then after finishing undergrad, I really fell in love with scuba diving while I was traveling. And through Google, I found out that maritime archaeology is a thing. And so I went to East Carolina University for my master's in history with a focus in maritime archaeology. After that, I got hired onto one of NOAA's research vessels doing seafloor mapping, primarily in the South Pacific. And I was there for almost 2 years and then ended up here in Thunder Bay in May. So I'm excited to be here. Still relatively new to Thunder Bay, but I really love it so far.
Great. So I guess what I'm interested in is finding out like what kind of rigorous training you have to go through in order to be an underwater archaeologist, in the Great Lakes, say. What you must have to do some kind of rigorous training to do that kind of technical diving. Is that true? Nope.
Yeah. My training was through field schools. You kind of approach it from two different ways. You have your dive training, which you're doing separate. So you're comfortable in the water, and then your archaeology training. You start learning those skills on land.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of combining them when you're underwater. There's some scientific diving courses that I've taken that just allow you to kind of task load yourself while you're underwater so that you are paying attention to your breathing air while also completing that task at hand for whatever you're doing at the time. So I wouldn't call it rigorous, but except for maybe some of the rescue courses, but it definitely some specialized training that's necessary.
Well, it seems.
I think to add.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think to add on to that too, the Great Lakes are such an awesome, unique environment, but notably it's very cold. So, it does take some getting used to diving in cold water and, getting used to doing these task-loaded dives in colder environments. That's definitely something that makes, I think, diving up here for our work a little bit unique. I wouldn't say harder, just unique.
I think unique. It's definitely it can be harder on your body and your mental state when you're trying to focus, but you're cold. I will say here, visibility is a blessing. It's amazing visibility what we work with up here compared to, say, down in Florida or some of the rivers I've worked in where you have
silt,
one maybe foot of viz if you're lucky. So it's I love it up here for visibility wise for doing work, getting work done.
So when you say it's cold, so you don't wear you don't wear dry suits. You still just wear wetsuits, right? And is that correct, or can you wear a dry suit?
Yeah, we use exclusively wetsuits. We do not use wetsuits.
Oh,
I
you
will
do
not
not?
be caught dead in Lake in a wetsuit.
Okay. Okay, so you use so the cold is not from the water touching your skin so much. It's just that it goes through the suit. You can't keep it all. You can't. It doesn't. Your suit doesn't insulate you that well from the temperature of the water. Is that right? Is that
So we don't have dry hoods.
yeah?
So our head, hair is still get wet.
Yeah.
Your face is exposed.
Yeah.
And if you're not wearing dry suit gloves, your hands also are
Yeah.
pretty chilly.
Yeah. So the temperature is like near freezing, right? 32 to 34 degrees or something when you're way down there. Is that right? The water temperature is pretty near freezing.
For Lake Huron, I would say when we're at about 130 feet in July,
Yeah.
the temperatures are around 39, 41, maybe 37, given a really cold year. It's been pretty warm here lately. Had a pretty warm winter. We didn't get a lot of ice coverage. So the water has been quite warm this year. But we start our diving in April to get our mooring buoys out, and those dives at 20 feet, 30 feet can be also at 39 degrees, 41 degrees. It just depends on the time of year.
So your face and your hands get cold. So that means it's probably does that imply that you're struggling to manipulate things because your hands are so cold? You're trying, if you need to examine things or something like that, then it's a little bit of a struggle.
Oh yeah. Collecting water samples when you have very cold hands and trying to twist on that little vial cap can be a little difficult.
Yeah. So how do you guys prepare for a dive? They say, okay, today we're going to go out and we're going to go down, like you say, to maybe 130 feet. So how do you prepare for that? In the mornings, how do you prepare for that? Like, do you eat breakfast, or do you avoid eating breakfast, or just a little bit of breakfast, or what? It seems like my stomach might be a little bit, upset a little before I go down in that kind of water.
I usually eat a big breakfast. If I'm going to be working that day, yeah, I'll eat a pretty good breakfast, and I snack continuously throughout the day.
Oh.
Something about being on a boat just makes me hungry.
I will say the one thing that dry suit diving is a problem with is going to the bathroom.
Oh.
So, I normally, you can't, unlike a wetsuit, you can't pee while you're underwater in a dry suit. So I normally have smoothies for breakfast, but on days that we're diving a lot, smoothies are not a good option. So that's kind of a unique thing I have to think about in the morning for diving.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of boat you're on, how big of a boat. So some of our boats have bathrooms, some do not. Some have a head and some have a bucket. So it kind of depends on what you can do that day. I will say when we're planning a dive like that, I always try to get a good night's sleep the night before. And because you can only have so much coffee. You can have to pee all day.
So I mean, do you have some kind of leader that, you have like a morning briefing and they go over, this is what we're going to do today, and this is what I want you to do, and this is what I'd like you to bring up or examine? Do they do that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So, the morning of a dive, there's other than, deciding what you want to have for breakfast, there's a lot of things that we look at. First and foremost, we look at the weather, make sure the conditions are going to be okay for us to be out there. We generally, as a rule of thumb, if the waves are going to be higher than about 2 to 3 feet, depending on where in the bay we are, that's kind of where we would call dive operations.
Depending on the boat.
Depending on the boat, the site, what we're planning on doing. But that's kind of a general rule for us. Once we've decided that the weather is going to be okay for us to go, and we have all of our gear on the boat, what we have is we do a generalized assessment of risk, or a GAR score. And essentially what we are doing as a dive team, the lead diver, whoever that may be for the day, runs basically a conversation between all the divers. And we look at things like our resources. How close are we going to be to medical help should something go wrong on the dive? What are the underwater conditions like that day? What's the weather doing? All of these things, how people are feeling, if anyone didn't sleep well last night, if anyone's not feeling well. And we basically talk through all of these things and give every category a number. And based on that number, we decide if it's safe to proceed with diving operations, or if it would be safer to postpone operations. So those are all things that we do. And we discuss the plan in depth. So for example, if we're going to be doing a general site monitoring dive and doing a photo model, so doing like a 3D model, how are we passing gear off the boat to the divers? What's the order of operations? Are we going to be doing water samples first? Are we going to be doing photos first? And just really talking through all aspects of that dive. So by the time that divers splash, everyone on the boat, topside and divers alike, know exactly what's going to happen for the whole process, so that there's no questions left to be answered. So that's kind of how we go through it in the morning once we get to the boat.
I see. And so then, like, what's the typical time then you finally splash, as you say? And then how long do you spend in the water after that? And do you go back down multiple times, or do you just go down one time, or it can vary?
So we try to get an early start because the wind kind of picks up in the afternoon. So weather is going to shift. But on a good day, we're usually in the water by 9:30, depending on how far offshore the site is. If we've got to travel 2 hours out to the wreck, it's not going to be that early.
Yeah.
But we stay underwater depending on however long the task takes, or depending on how much air we have, how long we can breathe on that tank. Andy and I have very similar breathing rates, which is very helpful because it means that we're both going through our tank at about the same time. But whether we go back down again on that same site or switch to another site, we will do multiple dives a day. When we're deploying buoys, we can do 5 or 6 dives a day. More if we have time, depending on the depth. But it's just kind of related to what task you're doing and how deep you're going, as long as we're within our boundaries of not absorbing too much nitrogen in our bodies. We have time to off gas, and we try to plan our dive day, we try to plan our diving around, so we have our maximum bottom time allowable. So we'll start on a deeper dive first, and then as we go throughout the day, we'll start doing shallower dives, and that allows us more bottom time with less time having to off gas for nitrogen bubbles.
Right. So what's the procedure? Suppose you're down at 130 feet, I guess I guess 40 feet is kind of like at least that was my understanding. Like it's about as deep as you can go without, doing anything special. Is that a true statement? Uh, about 40 feet? Or do you still have to worry about nitrogen? But anyways, the question is, you go down to 130 feet. Now, when you come back up, what do you have to do to protect yourself, against the bends?
Yeah. So, you are correct. Nitrogen is something you should be concerned about at any depth.
Yeah.
However, we are authorized to dive up to 130 feet without any special, like other precautions that are put into place such as decompression stops, things like that. So 40 feet is not, the max depth for just having a open circuit tank on. But as far as coming up, a slow ascent is key. So basically a nice slow ascent of like 30 feet per minute is the US Navy. You can go up pretty fast when you're underwater, but so a nice slow ascent. Essentially what you want is, as you're going up, you want to be ascending at a rate that is the same or slower than the bubbles that you see around you.
Yeah. Okay.
So a slow ascent is key, making sure you're not holding your breath during an ascent. And then we always do a safety stop at around 15 feet for 3 minutes. And that's just really for any and all dives that we do. Cassandra and I do not yet, but we are hoping to eventually do longer dives where we have to do required decompression stops. But right now we do no decompression diving. So that safety stop is really just an extra precaution to make sure that we are safe and minimizing the chance for decompression sickness. But it's not like we're doing an hour at 20 feet or anything like that.
So do they
minimal.
have on your boats, do they have a decompression chamber in case there's any problem, or what would happen if somebody did get, what do you call it? Decompression sickness? Or I call it the bends, but what would happen on board if somebody actually did get ill? Do they immediately try to get them to a hospital, or what? What would happen to that person?
So depending on the severity, so if you have a arterial gas embolism, or that's something you're going to know right away. And we do not have a chamber on board our smaller vessels here. But we are very, very lucky in Alpena in that our hospital has a decompression chamber that is active. So if something were to happen there where we needed to evacuate a diver, we would, depending on the weather and the availability of a first responder, the best thing to do would be just to hightail it back to the marina and EMS there at the dock and offload that diver so they could take them straight to the hospital.
I see. Okay. So now you're underwater, say at 130 feet. There's a shipwreck there. So what's the general plan for examining this ship, and your what's the archaeology part? What does that involve?
But yeah, so say there's a shipwreck at 130 feet, and it really depends on a lot of factors as to what we can do at that site. So if it's a new site we've never been diving on, or if it's a site we monitor all the time, those are things that we have to think about. How much time that we have to record the site, that's also really important. So for example, if it's a new site that no one's been on and we have ample time, we would first, of course, want to make sure we get really good video coverage of the site. If we have enough time, to take pictures to make a 3D model of the site. That's a really great, fairly fast way to have really accurate data on a site to make sure that, and we can use those models for all sorts of things from, just monitoring. So every year we make a model, we can see any sort of changes that are happening on the site by comparing those two models. They're also really great for public outreach. Anyone can interact with the model on shore. So it's a really great way for people to be able to see these sites. And then, of course, I think as all archaeologists, our favorite way to document a site, if we have the time and the resources, is to really get down there with some reels and a slate and take measurements and really record it, board by board and fastener by fastener, and really get a super detailed idea of that site. But of course, that's hard to do. It takes so much time, so many resources, especially at 130 feet. You're looking at 15, 20 minutes per dive to be able to record the site. So it's challenging to do, but it is really fun.
So could an ROV help you in those type of exercises? Can they make a fairly moderate size ROV that can go down there and accompany you and take pictures and measurements to help you out, or they don't have anything quite like that yet that could assist you guys while you're down there?
We use ROVs here in the sanctuary often to examine shipwrecks. It's a great way to, especially for deeper sites, to relieve. It's safer if we were to just deploy a ROV than a diver, especially on a site 250 feet. It's definitely you save a lot of resources doing that. But we don't really dive much with ROVs with the divers in the water. But they have so many, the technology now is so advanced that you can have video cameras, regular cameras, you can put on water sensors to do the temperature. They have the different tools that you can put on for the arms where you can grasp items and pick things up, drop things off. They've come a long way. And it's really exciting to see the ROVs work.
So I'm going to bring up, I maybe this is a morbid question, but have you ever discovered a body in a boat, in a ship, or a decaying body, or have you ever come across something like that? That's probably a great question.
Goodness, no.
Yeah, thank goodness, no.
I've worked on a project in Saipan where we were trying to recover human remains from an aircraft wreck. But that wreck from World War II. So luckily the body was not decomposing. We do have shipwrecks in the sanctuary that do have human remains on them. They are burial grounds. So it does happen, but luckily I've never experienced that, especially without knowing that it would happen. As a surprise.
That's not the kind of diving I want
to do. Well, I just wondered, because the water is very cold, and I understand that things don't, decompose that quickly, in that cold water. And so I just wondered if you came across that or not.
I've heard stories of it happening, but thank goodness it has not been us.
I've heard stories of where someone had fallen through the ice, and it was a long time before they were able to be recovered, but they survived because their body was so cold that everything kind of the hibernation mode. That's why they that saying, you're not dead till you're warm and dead. But
but I wondered, I wondered about that. So, well, what about okay, so you're 130 feet on the Great Lakes, and there must be some fish down there, like in some biota. So, do you also document that kind of stuff while you're down there, besides the artifacts and things?
Um, not on, not as our like primary goal.
Uh-huh.
But you can always tell when somebody is documenting, or maybe they're going with the camera, and they're documenting the shipwreck, and then suddenly they'll swing over and there'll be a fish that's with them, but they want to make sure to get it on camera. But it's not really something that we work on documenting. We do partner with Fish and Wildlife sometimes, or the Michigan DNR, to document reefs for them.
Reefs?
We have
Oh,
so artificial reefs
artificial.
for them.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's just a separate diving that's not necessarily working on the shipwrecks.
The shipwrecks themselves act as reefs in some sense, right? Do they become a reef? So
Yeah, they do.
So around Alpena there, what's the bottom like? What is it, sandy or rocky or gravelly? What would you say?
So we're lucky. We do have a lot of sand, which is really great. But we also do have a lot of limestone.
Mhm.
So there's some really cool formations around here, some sinkholes that were actually created because of holes in the limestone. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the base of Lake Huron is actually a limestone base.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of limestone reefs as well, where the fish like to lay their eggs. The sinkholes are really cool because they all of a sudden, are these huge holes, obviously filled with water because they're in the lake. But you'll be driving a boat and it's 30 feet, and then you pass over the sinkhole and all of a sudden it's 80 feet.
Mhm.
So that limestone is a really cool, unique feature for this area. But we are lucky. A lot of our sites are also on sand, so it's a mix.
Yeah, we have a healthy mix. There's some areas that are mud, like a silty mud kind of bottom. Those are obviously lower vis dives. But we do have, like Andy said, lots of limestone, which is a big reason that we have so many shipwrecks here. Lots of vessels ran aground on the limestone. We have lots of sand, some rocky areas when they're a little further inland or inshore. But it's a nice mix of different bottom types.
So, have you ever been to the bottom of these sinkholes? And do you see underwater streams or underwater springs coming out of the sinkholes, that kind of thing? Because I heard there was, at the bottom of these sinkholes, there's some marine plants or marine animals that don't populate, the lake outside the sinkhole or something like that. Seems to me I heard something like that. There's kind of unique life forms down there, not life forms, but unique species to that sinkhole. Is that a true statement or not?
Well, so you're referring to Middle Island sinkhole.
Okay, Middle Island sinkhole. All right.
Yeah, it's an underwater sinkhole. It's about 80 feet deep. And when you go down into it, there are some underwater streams that are happening. And it's so funny because somehow the water must be connected to, there has to be some kind of tunnel system for it. But the water at the library in Alpena has the water fountain outside of the library, I should say, has the same type of water that is flowing down there. It's like a sulfuric kind of smells like rotten eggs. But it's the same type of water that is flowing from the library there that it feeds from some kind of underwater tunnel
I see.
through the Stone Reef. But to answer your question, we do have a very, very unique environment to where it's a certain type of cyanobacteria that grows down in the sinkhole, and it creates these mats, like a cyanobacteria mat. And at nighttime, it's white. And then in the daytime, when the sun comes up, this purple mat kind of crawls up on top of it and creates a layer of purple. And then at nighttime, the white then rises above and takes over.
Huh.
So it's a pretty neat environment. We have people from all over the world have come and researched, collected samples and done work there. It's a really interesting place. It feels like you're on another planet when you're down there.
So it's not in Thunder Bay. It's not in Thunder Bay.
No.
It's in the lake.
Yeah, so that actually, it brings up a good point. The Thunder Bay Sanctuary, it started, because of the bay, but it actually is 4,300 square miles of lake. So it reaches all the way up to Mackinac City and down to Harrisville, Michigan. So it covers much broader area than just the bay. But it's still called Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary.
I understand. So I think there used to be a restricted area in Lake Huron out there where they used to have bombing runs from aircraft and that kind of thing. Is the sanctuary engulf any of that? Any of those old grounds? Are there? Do people ever find munitions laying at the bottom of the lake out there? Unexploded munitions?
That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone, but I'm sure they have. There's a lot of testing that still goes on today. Every now and then you hear a sonic boom from one of the planes that goes and will come over the lake and hits that, what is it, Mach 1 speed? Hits a certain speed and you'll hear this big boom and your windows will shake. And there's a lot of military training that goes on up here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're aware of it, but in Lake Michigan, there's a place where they trained in World War II, landing on these sort of mock aircraft carriers. And I guess there's over 100 airplanes that are still at the bottom of the lake out there. And I don't think they ever did anything like that on Lake Huron, but
I don't know, like aircraft landing, but I know that they had fighter jets that were flying in Lake Huron. They had for training the Tuskegee Airmen, if you've ever heard of them.
Yes.
They did. There's one plane wreck that was found down in Monroe, Michigan, off the coast there. That there's a lot of really unique history in Lake Huron.
Mm-hmm. Well, where I come from in Tawas Bay, there doesn't seem to be any wrecks in Tawas Bay, so it's kind of disappointing. You can't go down there and see something. But outside the point, there's Tawas Point out there, which is apparently there has been claimed to be a couple shipwrecks, but they're probably buried in the sand. And do you come across that where you might find this little thing sticking out of the sand, and then lo and behold, it's actually a pretty good sized boat that's there, sunk on the bottom, covered up with sand. Do you guys try to excavate that kind of thing?
So we don't do any excavations here in the sanctuary. It's more of a leave it as it is, and that will preserve it. Once you start to excavate a shipwreck, I should say excavation in itself is
destructive. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So you're exposing that wood to more oxygen, to even sunlight, depending on how deep it is. So leaving it buried under the sand is the safest place for it.
I see.
But that being said, we do have some wrecks here that are half exposed, half out of the sand, half out open. But it's really interesting when if you've had any bad weather and a lot of wave action, that sometimes the sand has receded around it. So you can actually see pieces that aren't normally exposed. We're seeing that a bit in a couple of our wrecks. And then, another storm will come and the sand will wash back over it and it's buried again for however many years.
And this is how deep? How deep does this still happen, that the sand can be moved around?
Yeah, probably 30 feet.
Yeah.
20, 30 feet.
Yeah, it's definitely more common with the shallower wrecks where the waves can impact the site more.
I see.
But
yes.
Okay, so it's the end of the day. You've done several dives. You're probably really tired and cold. What do you do for dinner? Do you bow down?
I think were you the one? No, I think it was another diver that I was talking to. For some reason, a day of diving, after that, all I want is a peanut butter jelly sandwich and a beer. That's my go-to. Like, I crave a peanut butter jelly sandwich.
That's interesting. Yeah, you get so hungry diving. It's so exhausting that when I'm done, I want like pizza, something warm, and extra cheesy.
Carbs,
extra carbs.
What you want. Carbs.
And then do you have to go back in the shore and then make a report? You spend several hours writing up a report, or do you have to do stuff like that in order to document your dive? Yeah, I see.
Absolutely. We may have to go and process whatever samples we have collected, or do the paperwork of making sure all of our dive logs and everything is in order, and making copies and scanning those. And sometimes, not necessarily like a full report if it's an ongoing project. It may be something that we are keeping notes on, and we'll write down our notes from that day and then do a larger report later on. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, the day is not done just because you got your boat back to the harbor.
Yeah. Well, so maybe one last question. For each of you, what was your most harrowing life, endangering experience out in Thunder Bay in your diving? Have you had something like that?
Can I go?
No, you go.
So this wasn't in Thunder Bay. And
nearby.
It was probably just okay. So this experience was actually down in Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
And we had a group of students in the water. We were doing field school for the West Florida, and so we were on a charter on a separate time. So the students that we had in the water all summer, they were great divers. And then we decided to take a charter boat out and go see another wreck further out in the bay, or further out in the
Gulf.
In the Gulf.
Yeah.
And a member from that charter got in the water with us, and we were about 100 feet down. There were bull sharks around us. They were kind of poking around, seeing what was going on. Which was fine. And everybody's kind of examining the wreck. And suddenly the diver from the charter company gigged a flounder that he found. Uh-huh. And immediately the sharks just started zooming, like swimming around pretty aggressively, and he ended up feeding the fish to one of the sharks, because I don't know what he was thinking or what he wanted to do. But having that happen and like have students in the water at the same time. And that was probably like my most stressful situation.
I can understand.
Yeah, that's scary.
It was. People are
How about
nuts.
you, Andy? What was you have a very experience where you were feeling pretty how should I say, nervous?
I feel really lucky. I haven't had too many harrowing experiences in the water, thank goodness. I'd like to keep it that way. But this is not in Thunder Bay. Luckily, diving in Thunder Bay has been...
No, the NOAA dive program goes above and beyond when it comes to ensuring there are protocols in place to protect everyone's safety. I feel very, very safe diving with this program because of the amount of planning and the amount of time and effort that goes into making sure these dives are successful and safe.
Good.
Yeah. I will say, I think mine is not as cool as bull sharks, but I was diving down in South Carolina with doing like an excavation down there, and there's like we were saying, luckily Thunder Bay has incredible visibility. Down there, you do not have any visibility. It's like diving in mud, So we're down there, and I'm taking measurements, and your buddies around, but you can't see them because you can't really see anything. And I am very scared of alligators. I don't like them. They freak me out. And so diving in water you can't see anything in, and there's alligators.
Oh, geez.
And then something bumps your leg, and you're like, well, this is it. Like, there's nothing. So I don't actually know if it was an alligator that bumped my leg, but I've never been more scared underwater.
I can understand that. We would like to thank Andy and Cassandra for taking the time to speak with us here at the Great Lakes Guys podcast. We hope you have enjoyed their stories, and maybe their exploits will prompt you to visit the Thunder Bay Marine Sanctuary Museum in Alpena sometime in the future. We will see you next time.
Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. The Great Lakes are a diamond on the hand of North America, a bright shining jewel on that friendship border ring. It's a freshwater highway coming down from Canada, and all along the coastline you can hear the people sing, sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and Sault Ste. Marie, blue water Huron.